and we are so pleased to have a wonderful panel this evening and a great discussion as we prepare to send our beautiful children back to school. I am Dr. Damian Harris Madden, the Executive Director of the Westchester County Youth Bureau, and I am so pleased to be joined by many esteemed experts in the field of social, emotional, physical, psychological health and wellness, as well as some of our leading elected officials. My bosses are present today to bring greetings to the listeners and watchers this evening. We are just so pleased to have this opportunity to bring the third series to you via Facebook Live. And so we ask that you please bear with us. We always have to be mindful of the time and our technology as we are in new terrain, and we want to always bring high quality resources and information to you. We ask that those listening via Facebook Live to kindly ask questions via the chat, and those that registered via WebEx, which I believe we have about 170 registrants tonight. Be patient as we try to get through your questions. I'd like to first thank Dr. DeFore Pierce, who is a school psychologist who is joining us this evening from the East Ramapo School District, my Jack and Jill sister and wonderful psychiatrist, Dr. Ludmila Mesdor. Also, Dr. Adler from our wonderful partners at the Maria Ferreri Children's Hospital at the Westchester Medical Center. Dr. Cheryl Burton, another expert in the field who is a psychotherapist, member of the Zeta Phi Beta Inc. sorority, as well as a licensed clinical social worker. And we also have none other than Cheryl Brannon, who has been of great assistance to us in hosting these COVID-19 conversations and solutions. So at this time, I'd like to introduce first Mr. George Latimer to bring greetings, as well as our Deputy County Executive. And I will save my remarks to the end because I think that we're going to hear a lot of information, and I don't want to stand in the way of our parents, our providers, our youth, and our community members learning more about the ways in which we cope with COVID-19, prepare our young people to enter back into school successfully, and also deal with the many challenges that they've been experiencing from the social, emotional, and psychological aspects. So at this time, please let me introduce Mr. George Latimer, our county executive. So we can never account for technology failure, right? At this point, we're going to allow George's mic to be adjusted. He is off of mute. However, we're going to go to Ken Jenkins, who is our Deputy County Executive, while we work out the kinks with George. So, George, I have to say, you look dashing. You look very good. Although we cannot hear your voice at this time, just know that you look amazing. And we're going to figure out what's happening with the technology. But I know that you have been a huge supporter, as our Deputy County Executive has been, in terms of allowing the Youth Bureau our creative work and allowing us to partner with so many different organizations, many hospitals, many medical experts, and you yourself have been on the forefront ensuring that our communities have PPE, they are supported through the health department, through the Department of Community Mental Health, and just young people in general. We know that you care very deeply for what happens with our young people. And so I apologize that your mic is not working. But again, your smile looks great. You're looking good. And I thank you for being with us. Deputy County Executive, I thank you also for being with us. And so at this point, we're going to shift to our wonderful moderator, Cheryl. And George, if at any point you want to stop back by and maybe you log off and come back in, we will certainly pause to allow you to give remarks. But if not, I think we're going to keep moving. And okay, so we thank everyone for their participation. You are extremely busy as well as a deputy county exec, so we understand if you cannot be with us for a long time. I'd be remiss if I did not thank our team with the Westchester County Youth Bureau, as well as those that are listening in from the Hudson Valley region of youth bureaus. We have folks as far as Tompkins County, Washington, D.C., who is registered. So this is a hot topic. As we know, so many young people have been experiencing trauma and are concerned, but we are here to give some reassurance and expert advice. So I'd just like to say thank you also to Senator Mayer, who is also attending tonight, and the elected officials that have signed on. I think it's really just a testimony to how much information people want to continue to keep updated with, and their interest in making sure that our young people are best served. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to you, Cheryl, so that you can take us through the PowerPoint and with our wonderful panelists.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so very much. It's my pleasure to serve as your moderator this evening. And we've got, as you said, Damia, a wonderful hot topic. And I know we will cover it in earnest. We'll all walk away certainly learning something. So that said, I'm looking forward to diving right in, but I certainly want to commend both our county executive and deputy county executive for their commitment and support to our county, and certainly the Westchester County, and as well, of course, Dr. Damia Harris Madden, your excellent leadership and stewardship with the Westchester County Youth Bureau. That is what allows creative programming, important programming like what we have going on tonight occur. So that said, I am just delighted to look out in WebEx land and see so many of you, and you are in the right place at the right time. Our topic, COVID-19, parents and students preparing for back to school. And that's our town hall here this evening, a very, very important topic. And I know we have a diverse audience out there. We've got the parents, we've got students, we've got educators, providers, we've got nurses, and the list goes on. So you will find, I'm sure, that as the information is shared, that it will be applicable across the board. So certainly while we're targeting parents and students, it's something that will certainly be worthy and of interest to all of you. So that said, our topics for this evening are one, COVID-19. What is social and emotional health, and how does it affect families? And we all have been hearing so much about social and emotional health lately, and especially with the pandemic, it's become even more important. And we really want to put our finger on it and help you better understand what it means, how to look for it, how it shows up, and certainly how you can respond. We're also going to talk about how do families deal with loss. And that's been a big one for us, of course. Certainly during this pandemic, many of us have lost family members. Many of us have been furloughed or lost jobs, or certainly even lost relationships. So loss has really been a big part of certainly this pandemic, and we want to shine a light on loss as well. So we'll talk about that a bit. Then we'll move right along and talk about how do parents and students have those difficult conversations. And I'm sure we all know those difficult conversations are so important now more than ever, as many of us are certainly self sequestered and in close proximity now more than ever. So, how do we have those difficult conversations? And further, how do parents provide structure and monitoring? As we head back to school, we know that structure and that monitoring is going to be so important. And let's face it, parents are not used to being educators and social workers and the like. So they become certainly challenged even more so now. So, how do we deal with that? And then finally, how do parents and students adjust to the change? and create new positive realities, because that's what we want. We want positive outcomes. And so that's why I am so delighted this evening to have some wonderful, wonderful presenters, very, very learned on the topics, and they're going to share with us. Not only are they going to share good information, but they've got some wonderful resources as well. And we'll be sending the PowerPoint out to you so that you'll have those resources handy. And finally, let me just say, if you have any questions, please be kind enough to put them in the chat box. And as we conclude, we will certainly circle back around and answer as many questions as we can. So with that said, without any further ado, let's move right on to our first speaker. And that certainly is none other than Dr. Ludmila Mesidor. She's a psychiatrist in practice. As noted earlier, she's also with Jack and Jill of America, the Hudson Valley chapter. She actually graduated with a child and adolescent fellowship at Brown University, their School of Medicine, and is doing a great job with her private practice. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to give the floor to none other than Dr. Mesidor. Come on down.
Thank you very much for that, Cheryl. I appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased to be able to speak to you guys on this very topic. And this is a very important topic that all families I know might be struggling with. So let's start with my first slide. What is social emotional health? Okay. Human beings, from the moment that we are born, um, the front of our brain is underdeveloped, and that front of the brain usually controls how we react to things, how do we respond to things, and as we develop and we grow older, depending on how people respond to us as children and as we mature, helps us to be able to develop the appropriate responses that we need to have in our society in terms of relationships and in terms of being able to control ourselves and control our anger and control our excitement when it's not socially appropriate, and so on and so forth. So, by definition, social emotional development is the process by which children grow over time to be able to recognize and manage one's own emotional state. And this is really a critical process that spans throughout childhood into adolescence. And it's so critical because it allows children to have the ability to have friendships, to be able to have, boyfriends, girlfriends, or any sort of romantic relationships, to be able to work well with their coworkers or classmates throughout time. And this is something that, as adults, that we may take for granted in how we communicate and socially interact with other people. It's incredibly important, pandemic or not, that we always foster social emotional development in a positive way. Um, we do that is by monitoring our children, our teenagers, our adolescents, and basically encouraging their knowledge of their own feelings, validating their feelings, and helping them come up with different ways to appropriately react to their feelings. So I'll give you two examples. I'll give you a smaller child example, and I give you like an adolescent example. A small child, so like two little kids like in a school together, and one kid takes the other kid's toy from the other kid's hand, and then the other kid gets really upset and starts yelling, right? The appropriate way to address that would be to talk to the kid who got the toy ripped out of his hand and validate that they're upset because something was taken away from them, and then direct them instead of like maybe hitting or yelling or screaming or any of those types of behaviors. Direct them into what the appropriate reaction would be, which would be to talk to the person, say, "Hey, you took this away from me," or to seek help from an adult. This could also presents itself also with teenagers in terms of like, let's say they get a disappointment from school, or they have a crush on somebody and they find out that there's unrequited feelings that they have, to validate. And what validation really means is to basically say, yes, you do feel this does feel negative, or this does feel positive. It could also be a positive emotion, and then kind of direct them to the appropriate response. So in that crush situation, example that I gave you, you could be like, yes, it really feels badly when somebody you care about doesn't feel the same way. So how do we appropriately respond to this, right? We don't yell at the person, we don't badger them, you know we work out within ourselves, and we start to focus on somebody else or something else. So those are just really important things. And this is why people send their kids to school. This is why people send their kids to, play groups and things like that, is to socially um, give them that knowledge so that they can be successful in the future through these processes. And now that's very difficult because of COVID. We're lacking that. We're lacking that social medium for the kids to grow and learn, and for us to help shape them in that sense, which could lead to kids being more quiet. It could lead to kids being maybe even a little more inappropriate socially than they would have been, because they're so much more sequestered from other children and others' peer groups. So one of the things that I, recommend to families is that through this, we constantly have to check in with our kids about how they're doing and how they're managing within this. And because this is such a long thing, this isn't something that's just 1 month or 2 months or 3 months over social distancing. This is something that's going on and on and on. We have to figure out the best way to have these kids socialize, but also in a risk management way. Um, how do we get them to also be safe? And so some of the ideas that I've been expressing to patients and families is that, you might want to pick one family or one group that you all are going to agree not to socialize with anybody else, and have those kids socialize together and wear masks outside. And, when it gets too cold, maybe get tested, if that's available to you, and just spend time with that family, so that you're lowering the risk of having multiple exposures, but then your kids are still getting some social emotional interaction. I mean, human beings in general, there's very few cases where human beings function well isolated and alone. And unfortunately, for survival during this pandemic, we've been having to do that. So that is just some of the recommendations I have in terms of allowing your kid to have social interactions, monitoring them for that, and being able to manage that through this situation. And one thing I always want to point out, that as you're going through this, if you start to notice that your child starts to become more irritable, more destructive, not taking care of themselves, not eating, not sleeping, not enjoying things, you can't get them to go play ball outside, it's very important to seek professional help, whether it is with a child psychotherapist or a child psychiatrist. And at the end, I want to let you guys know that there is hope. Although this is a very challenging time, and the way in which we usually interact is not the same, and we have to find and look at things a little bit differently to help still foster healthy social and emotional health. There's hope, because children are resilient. Children are actually incredibly resilient, even more so resilient than adults. And let me give you what the formal definition of resilience. And resilience is the ability to overcome serious hardships. Okay, so people who are resilient are able to bounce back. And Harvard recently did a study, I think it was within the last year, 2019 or 2018, and they did it with so many children. And they found out that the number one thing that helps a child be resilient and overcome hardships is just having at least one adult who they can talk to, who they can have a good relationship with, who listens to them, and who's a positive influence in their life. So as long as one of you guys who are listening could be that positive person for your child, or for the children that you're responsible for, you have a high chance of your child being resilient. And so no matter what is thrown in during this period of time, they will be able to rebound from that. And one of the resources that I wanted to share with all of you is the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, which is the acronym ACAP. They have a website, and that website is wonderful. It has a lot of things for families and youth in terms of issues with being anti-racist, issues with dealing with COVID, things about just depression, things to deal with, all sorts of problems that it can talk about. So that's a resource that I just want to open up to you that many people aren't knowledgeable of, that could be helpful to you and your family.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. That was wonderful. Certainly a wealth of information. And as you noted, just having that one adult that you can talk to can really make the difference in our children's lives. And certainly we appreciate the excellent examples that you shared as well in terms of not only toddlers, but teenagers. So thank you again for that wonderful presentation. And just prior to moving on, Dr. Mesidor, I wanted to ask you one quick question. As I said, we have a very broad audience out there. We want to direct this question in support of our providers, those that perhaps may be hosting a site for students when they're not in school. On days that they're not actually in the school building, they may be going to a community center or some other provider type site. And so my question to you specifically is, what advice might you give to leaders in those types of environments that are providing a service to our youth as it relates specifically to social and emotional health? Any quick tips that you can share?
Well, I would just be present as much as you can. I mean, all of us are going through something, but if you can be present for those kids, I mean, that is the easiest and most helpful thing that you can do. If those kids come to talk to you, if you notice that something doesn't seem right with one of them, or they seem odd, or something's going on, and and speaking to them and potentially contacting their families, I think that's one of the best things you can do. Make it a warm environment, an open environment, a tolerant environment. Also be just aware, cognizant of the fact that, these kids are going through something, because this is such a different experience than they ever have. And, it might be difficult for them, maybe doing their online schoolwork, in your community center or whatnot, or they may have some struggles. And just basically having staff be as attentive as possible, and to be as open as possible, to being adjustable to these needs, to reassuring the children, to acknowledging whatever issue that they are planning out, whether they don't understand something that they're learning or whatnot, and just kind of being somewhat of a grounded, open space, a sense of calm for them, I think will foster a good learning environment.
Excellent, excellent. Wonderful, wonderful tips. Thank you so much for sharing. And now we're going to move right on to our next presenter. And our topic here is, how do families deal with loss, as we had noted earlier. And again, that's the family members, the jobs, the relationships. And we have presenting on this topic none other than Dr. Deborah DeFore Pierce. She's a school psychologist at the East Ramapo Central School District. And not only that, she has a private practice, and she actually has over 25 years of experience in counseling. So she's really been steeped in this issue, social and emotional health, pertaining to our youth. So without any further ado, we're going to turn it right over to Dr. DeFore Pierce. You have the floor.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you for having me. Um, as we know, families across the country are adapting to the evolving changes in their daily lives caused by COVID-19. The social, emotional, and behavioral and mental health of students during the pandemic is of great concern. Students are experiencing many challenges. Parents are also experiencing challenges as caregivers, and they're faced with helping their families to adjust to the new normal. So this includes trying to keep children occupied and feeling safe at the same time. There are confirmed traumas that are due to the effects and the circumstances of the pandemic. And examples of those are grief. And grief is basically described as the natural emotional response to the loss in the time of death. So death is a form of grief. Divorce is also seen as a loss, and the transition to COVID is seen as a loss. So the symptoms of grief or social transition are marked by the loss of interest in daily activities, changes in eating and sleeping habits, wishing to be with your loved ones. In this particular sense, students look to feel connected to the deceased person or the lost person who left the home during a divorce. So changes in the form of divorce or separation of parents, and there's a loss of the intact family connections. There's also fear of being alone. Lately in my private practice, this has been coming up a lot. Students don't feel that they're physically connected with friends and other family members due to the pandemic. So now with the world change, there's a loss of familiar daily routines like going to work, going to school, and different recreational activities that children experience. So other symptoms are significant decreases in academic performance and achievement, increased somatic complaint. There's a lot of children complaining about headaches and stomach aches. And there's also a change in attendance or their lack of participating in online learning. So there's grief and social transitions, and this can be addressed by parents being a role model to their children. And children mirror what they see their parents do. So, as a role model, you need to stay calm, you need to listen to your children and offer reassurance. You need to maintain routines as normal as possible and provide a sense of control, because children look for predictability in their day-to-day environment. And with the pandemic, the routine of predictability is kind of out of the window to a certain extent because people are adjusting to the loss of jobs, divorce, and death. Ask questions to ascertain your child's understanding of what is going on, because they need to express their feelings and their thoughts about how they feel in relation to the different changes. Provide useful, accurate information about people, events, reactions, and feelings. Children feel empowered once they feel that they're in control of the aspects in their lives. So a sense of control reduces their fears. Use language that's appropriate developmentally to your children. Let your children's questions guide your response. So you have to be very truthful and honest when you respond to your children. Don't avoid giving them information that the experts say that they need to know in order to deal with the pandemic. Often children and youth don't talk about their concerns because they are confused or they don't want to worry their loved ones. So younger children absorb scary information in waves. So what they do is they ask questions, they listen, they play, and then they repeat the cycle over and over again until they process the information that they're gaining from parents. So parents need to model healthy coping strategies, such as eating and sleeping um, appropriately, exercising, doing relaxation techniques, such as deep breathing and muscle relaxation. Um, these are very vital tools to calm the nervous system. So kids won't feel stressed, and even parents, if you do the breathing and the muscle relaxation, it helps you to calm down. Encourage your students to adopt adaptive coping strategies, um, like students participating in sports, even if it's socially distanced, and clubs like the boys' clubs, girls' clubs, youth groups. And there are a lot of youth groups that are sponsored by fraternities and sororities, and of course, the Youth Bureau. So I've provided resources that will help you gain information on how to deal with grief and how to support your families during COVID-19. Also, since COVID-19, the stigma of racism has kind of revealed its head, and parents need to know how to talk to children about what is going on in the world in relation to racism. So there's one resource put together by the National Association of School Psychologists. There's also Teaching Tolerance, which is a good website that deals with how to speak to children about racism. There are books about dealing with death and dying and being afraid. And those books I highlighted here in the resources.
Excellent. Thank you so very much, Dr. DeFore Pierce. Certainly gave us some good strategies and things to hone in on as it relates to loss across the board. And again, in various different settings, because we know that loss manifests itself in many, many different ways. So that said, you mentioned the racism. I'm wondering if you might comment on how could racial trauma, especially with all of the killings of Black men and women and actually people of color in plain sight, in plain sight, how does that actually affect students? So, yeah, I mean, students are in large part seeing this every day.
Yes, and that's something that I deal with too in the schools. There's an adverse effect on one's mental health, seeing the extensive violence that's going on in our country today. A lot of kids, their self-esteem is very low because they don't feel that they're seen as a person. They see themselves as being perceived as Black first before they are seen as having a stand in society, or being a person instead of just a person of color. There's also a disconnect where they don't perceive themselves to be part of society, and they feel that they're not truly seen as free as other people in society. There's mistrust, and there's fear, and all this leads to like symptoms of underlying PTSD, with the constant exposure of children bombarded with police violence in the news and in social media. So with all this violence and people perceiving that there's a miscarriage of justice, um, students don't see um, any self-worth. And I think that, schools need to address this more because Black history is only celebrated or recognized in the month of February, and that's the shortest month of the year. Um, Also,
Okay.
there needs to
Oh,
be more of the talk where children learn how to deal with the situations, how parents now are telling kids how to deal with police and how to deal with racism. So more of that talk needs to be done at home.
okay, great. Thank you very much for sharing that. Uh, Dr. Harris Madden, did you want to ask a question now or? All right. Well, perhaps we'll come
And
back to that. Yeah, go right ahead.
no, but Cheryl, I can move past that. I'll just focus on what was just said. Although I don't want to go too far off topic, but clearly we don't know what is ahead with COVID-19. But I am glad that the topic has kind of been brought up about the social injustice and how it relates to loss, because as much as we can, we want to provide, information at a medical level, but also from a social level, and that how that impacts stress, the trauma that was mentioned earlier in terms of PTSD. That also affects the health of young people. And so we would be remiss if we did not kind of just talk about that briefly, although that is not the focus for today. But I suspect that some young people are going to go back to school just as we as adults are going into our workplaces, into our churches, our households with a very heavy heart. And this is not relegated to those of color, but also to our allies who are seeing the miscarriage of justice, if you will, play out on national TV screen. But I think that it's always important to kind of tie in how the trauma is closely related to the medical aspects and how we internalize
Absolutely.
things. And so I just wanted to add that point. And to Dr. Mesidor's point, I'm a parent of 3 children, 2 of which are very young, and the social and emotional challenges and stresses of trying to dissect the ABCs of racism. And I say that often, but I'm serious. We thought the solution was to watch CNN. Not so. This kind of impacts it all. And so this exasperates the challenges of trying to explain how COVID-19 is really ravaging our communities, and the issue of loss when you have grandparents or cousins or aunts who have passed. So I just wanted to add that point, not to monopolize, but just to add that connection is really important. And I thank both doctors for doing that.
Great. Thank you very much. We do want to make sure we tie it all together. We also want to keep this train moving to make sure that we have questions, time for questions at the end. So thank you, Dr. Harris Madden, for sharing those comments. Moving right along, we have our very next presenter, and I think somebody needs to mute their phone. Hearing a lot of background right now. Not sure who that is. Okay, great. That's much better. And now we're going to move right along as we continue to tie this whole phenomena together and certainly strive towards positive outcomes and strategies to help us make improvements. So that said, our next topic is how do parents and students have those difficult conversations? Because those are obviously very important as we move along in the process. And to present this particular topic is none other than Dr. Arlene Adler. She too is very accomplished. All of our presenters are so accomplished this evening. She is at the Maria Ferrari Children's Hospital at Westchester Medical Center, where she's an assistant professor of pediatrics. And if that were not enough, she's also with not only professor of pediatrics and psychiatry, she's also at New York Medical College, where she is the chief of psychology department of pediatrics. So clearly she wears a couple of different hats. She also has a private practice, and we look forward to hearing your remarks. You have the floor. Dr. Arlene Adler, come on down. Are you unmuted, Dr. Adler? There you go. Great. We see you.
Yeah.
Okay, now we can hear you. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to participate in this very important and very timely topic. These are very difficult and strange times. We're all learning, and parents are wearing many hats. We're all wearing many hats. Parents wear a lot of hats. Now they're wearing more. Now they're teacher, their guidance counselor, their therapist, their coach, their everything. It's not easy. It could be done. I wanted to just highlight that these challenging situations are going to lead to difficult conversations. And I just want to point out maybe some difficult conversations that may arise as we try to keep our children emotionally healthy during this time and productive academically during COVID. I just want to say Dr. Mesidor gave my talk, so it was wonderful. And so I'm going to, build on some of her scaffolding. So I want to talk a little bit about the emotional part and then, get into the academic part. I really want to say with the role with all the hybrid models out there in learning, it's not just going to be about academic success and productivity. It's really going to be about nurturing the emotional well-being of our children and getting them through this to the other side. It builds resilience. Just to comment on it briefly, if they can weather this, the literature on resilience suggests they'll be able to get through anything else. That's the payoff. Whatever comes down the road after this may look like small potatoes relative to this. New challenges will be easier. So that said, the parents, when it comes to the schooling part, are going to need to be actively involved. It's not going to be possible to just sit your child down, and give them their work, leave and come back a little later. It's going to be important to be actively involved in the planning and monitoring of their work. So what are some of the things that go on? Parenting in close quarters. Look, we're all jammed in a house or in, apartments, and it's tight. Make space for the painful feelings. Kids have experienced stunning losses this year, and they're angry, they're sad, they're frustrated, they're disillusioned about their circumstances. Look, you can't replace the losses, but don't underestimate the power of empathy, of just understanding and saying, I get it. Make room for relief and happiness, meaning the same child who 1 minute is complaining to you about how horrible our things are may be happy and joyful the next. And don't begrudge them these moments of relief that come, during these difficult times. Expect pushback and friction regarding not only social restrictions, but, the schoolwork. They want to see their friends. That's normal. The work is hard, it's boring, it's tedious, it takes time, and it's even all those things when you have to do it by yourself, physically and socially isolated. Allow for alone and private time. Kids are away from us when they're at school, they're with their friends, they can't be under scrutiny 24/7, particularly teenagers. They're not wired to be under their parents' watchful eyes 24/7. And try to create an environment where you problem solve together. Treat them as problem solving partners. Next slide. So what do you do when things go south? When there's distress or meltdowns during these conversations. The most important thing we've all learned is to listen, listen, and listen. Try not to interrupt. Dr. Mesidor and everybody else has been saying, offer sincere empathy. Just kind of say that stinks. Validate the distress. You have every reason to be upset. Support their coping, whatever they're doing. Just saying, what can I do to help? Want some tea? Want some water? Want some milk and cookies? Try not to be dismissive. Express non-dismissive confidence, kind of just say, look, it's tough, but you can get through it. Offer to problem solve, is good. Ask them if they have any ideas that they may think that'll work, but ask them if they want your help. If they don't, just listen, and they just want somebody there so they can blow off self-esteem. It's important to divide the problem into buckets. I really want to highlight this for a second or two. Brainstorm solutions into the things that are within their control and another bucket of things that are beyond their control, and focus their energies on what can make a difference. Because what you don't want is then to take responsibility for things that are beyond their control. The downside to that is, in the long run, they never feel like they've done a good enough job and they never can relax. So help them, discriminate these two and really help on focusing on what they can manage, and help them sort of learn to think about the things a little differently that are beyond their control. Okay, next slide. And let me just, one other thing just to mention, and the other thing is, when there's the meltdown, you try all these remedies. If it doesn't work, or if you're still concerned about your child, the signs to really look for, if they're withdrawn or irritable, if there's any substance use, or, excessive video gaming, or there's a lot of junk habits going on, that's the time to reach out to the professionals. So now I want to talk about the school part, the learning part. And I have two slides here, and they're broken down into really talking about executive thinking skills. And some of you may be familiar with this topic in the, ADHD literature, but I think we can all benefit from it. I think parents are going to have to, it's going to be important for them to help their children develop executive thinking skills, which have to do with planning, being able to set a goal and have a plan to make it happen. And that requires, planning, having organizational skills, keeping track of the important information, time management skills, literally about staying within the limits and the deadlines, and the metacognitive skills, which are very important, which allow them to step back, survey what's going on, how's it going, and how are they doing in response to this, how's the workload? Is it manageable? Is it not manageable? Should we make it larger? Should we make it smaller? Do we need more time? Do we need less time? And then how is the child responding to that? Are they doing it with ease and grace, or is it, causing a lot of internal turmoil and upset and stressing them out? In which case you want to slow it down. Something to help them with time management and organizational skills is kind of a technique called externalizing time, which has to do with, look, kids are in the moment. They have very poor concepts of time and future events. So you externalize the time by having a clock in the room or a timer. And another technique when they have long-term project is bridging time, where you help them, break things up into smaller chunks so that you help them build a bridge across the time gap between when the work was assigned and when it's due. Just little things, giving them a place to do the work is also important. And they have trouble holding all this information in their head, so put little Post-its at their work site, which is, take your time, stay on task, ask for help if you need it, read the directions carefully, double check your work, etc. Next slide. The other this slide is about really focusing on how the child is managing emotionally and behaviorally what's going on there. And the issues are task initiation, persistence, flexibility, emotional control, and not being so impulsive. Task initiation, you want to help them avoid procrastination. The persistence is helping essentially this whole thing is about saying, let's make a plan, let's have a goal, let's make a plan, let's implement the plan, let's stick to the plan, And the way you stick to the plan is by monitoring the plan to see how it's going. How am I doing? So that you can self-correct as needed. That requires the flexibility. The emotional control is not letting their emotions or their boredom, their anger, their frustration derailing them. And again, you want to keep them, in a situation where they're not becoming impulsive and, giving up too quickly, and moving on. Um, I wanted to say the reason that's important, and I'll be finished. I know I may be taking a little bit too long, 1 or 2 more minutes, please. The reason why, I just want to say why, this is really important is that these things can cause, emotional upset in the children. And, everybody's been talking about relaxation techniques and breathing and mindfulness, et cetera, et cetera. The reason why it's so important is, a short statement about that is, the brain's developing, as Dr. Mesidor said, and it starts to remodel itself at around 10. And the primitive parts of the brain right behind, above the neck, get done first, and those are the emotional centers. Last to get upgraded is the thinking part behind the cortex. The point of this is that the kids can be rational when they're calm, but they're in a delicate balance, because if they get upset, their primitive emotional part of their brain that's been upgraded overwhelms
Okay.
the upgraded, thinking part. So the relaxation techniques help them calm the body. And when you calm the body, you can calm the mind and think straight, problem solve. So the resources I will come to, but what's important to know is it was a tragic year, and out of the tragedy can come lots of opportunities of new innovations, new growth, reflection, and creativity. It's very important to know anxiety ebbs and flows. It has a life cycle on its own. We're not broken, we're just self-correcting. And here are some resources. Anything written by Russell Barkley is to be swept up. And Lisa D'Amour is a psychologist. She writes in the Times. She has a lot of podcasts and emotional health fact sheets that you can download at your convenience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adler. Wonderful presentation, a lot of great information shared, really honing in on how to work with students in the home environment, and certainly how to adjust or pivot towards success and putting processes in place, and certainly problem solving. So thank you so very much for that wonderful presentation. We're actually going to hold off on the question for you until the very end. Thank you. Now we're going to move right on. We're going to continue with this train and this wonderful information. And we're going to hear from Dr. Cheryl Burton. And Dr. Cheryl Burton is a licensed clinical social worker. She's a psychotherapist, and she's also a certified coach. And if that's not enough, she's also a member of the Zeta Phi Beta sorority. And I saw that their president was on the call as well. So we know we have some of their members in the house. And Dr. Burton is going to speak about how parents and students, most importantly, adjust to change and create those new positive realities, because that's what we want. We want those positive outcomes. You should also know that Dr. Burton has served for 25 years as a school social worker, and she's currently a John Maxwell coach. So she has a breadth of information, and we're so delighted to have her presenting here this evening. Dr. Burton, you have the floor.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to this very, very important town hall with a topic that we all have a lot of interest in. I'm sure I'm going to repeat some of what my fellow panelists mentioned because it's all about the emotions and how you deal with the emotions. But as I was preparing for this presentation, there were four words that just kept gnawing at me. And you see them on the screen. They're grace, tolerance, reassurance, and patience. Uh, None of us have been this way before. And I think the key thing for all of us to remember, whether we're a parent, certainly a child, um, co-workers, family members, whoever we are, we need to extend grace to each other because we're all learning to deal with something that's very, very challenging for the first time. So we have to be tolerant because we're not all going to respond the same way. Some people keep their feelings inside, they're bottled up. Some people express them in ways that like seem out of control to some of us. So we need to be tolerant. We need to extend grace. We need to reassure children. We need to reassure other people in the family, our colleagues. We have to reassure others that this too shall pass. We have strength that we can lend to others. And then we also have to be patient. So in this case, I know that we're mounting a lot on parents. Parents already have their regular duties as parents, and you can think about anything, and that's part of a parent's duty. But uh, at this point, we're seeing parents as leaders, and leaders show the way. And we need to help parents to really begin to realize that they need to take care of themselves also. Because when you take care of yourself, then you have something to give to others. You can't give what you don't have. And many times parents walk a fine line. How much should I take for myself? How much should I give to my children? But this is not the time to feel guilty about taking care of yourself. Remember, we're always modeling. Our children are always watching us. So we need to show our children that we also need to take care of ourselves, but we can also be there for them. This is a time for authentic parenting. We don't need to have our children feel that we know all the answers because we don't. We really don't. And we need to show them not a skewed perspective of COVID, but a very authentic, realistic way to handle this. If we're fearful, if we are confused, um, we might not have to say everything that we feel, but let them know that we do have some of the same fears, but that there are places and there are people that we can talk to where we can get information. Our children need to see that we're real, but they still need to know that we're going to be there for them. We can express our vulnerability because vulnerability does not mean that you're weak. So our children need to see that we are also resilient. We're modeling resilience and we're letting them know that despite how we feel, this is a time for that in-flight instructions when we get on the plane. They said, put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you help others. So parents, take care of yourself. Don't feel guilty. Don't neglect yourself because you need that to help your children. Um, the emotions are going to be vast from A to Z. We're going to find that we or the children might feel down, and then there's, depression runs a whole a gamut. We might just feel out of it. We might feel kind of lackadaisical. We don't know what we want to do. We just feel out of sorts, and then we can feel very, very depressed. Remember that there are people, reach out to your school counselors, psychologists, social workers. Some teachers might also be able to help you. But don't feel that you have to say everything or to know everything. Um, the other thing that is really very important is that children don't always have, depending on their developmental age, don't always have the words to express what they feel. So you have to check in with them often. Look at their behavior. If they are too isolated, if they want to stay in their room, we might feel, okay, they're in their room, they're fine, but check in with them because they might be feeling something that needs to be expressed and they might not be able to put it into words. So, as parents, we have to help them to find some way to express themselves. So, some might be encouraged to draw, some might be encouraged to write something. You know, just try to find some way to help them to express themselves. As a family, this is a really good time to begin to reimagine what do I want my family to look like. We've been forced to do certain things. Look at what is it that we've been forced to do. We have not been able to go out as we were able to go out before COVID. What kind of activities have we been doing? Have you been doing as a family? Um, this is the time when we can really hone in on the strengths of our family. What are you doing now that's bringing you closer together? One of my presenters mentioned about debts. Yeah, this is something that a lot of us have never experienced. Can be here today and not here tomorrow. How do we really uh, show our family members that we value them? You know, um, spend time talking about how you feel about this situation, but some of the dreams that you have, this is a time to dream. You know, there are a lot of opportunities even in this time of challenge. So even though we want to keep it realistic, we also don't want to lose perspective that there are opportunities in challenges. Um, we might find that this is a time that we want to keep family meetings. You know, we might have been having family meetings. We want to continue having family meetings. How do we keep our family resilient through this crisis? I mentioned emotions before. Children really need to have their feelings validated. Uh, they're scared. They're not able to think through their feelings as some of us adults are able to, and even some of us adults have difficulty doing that. So validate their feelings. Don't minimize their feelings. They need to feel that they can speak to someone without being dismissed. In terms of adults, yes, you need to find someone also to share your feelings with. Um, and then we need to realize that we have more control over our actions than we really think. And this is a time that we can dig into some of those and find out some things about ourselves that we have not really been privy to before. Our thinking really drives our feelings. Our thinking drives our feelings, and our feelings drive our actions. So, if we can begin to talk to our children about what they're, how, when you see them feeling or acting in a certain way, try to talk to them about what is it they're thinking about and what is it, how does that make them feel? Many times that's not the way we're used to talking to our children, but this is the time to develop those real
I
skills
like that.
that can keep the family united. So don't be afraid to look for these at these new things that you're developing as a family and make your family feel the resilience that's really possible for them. In terms of going back to school, help your child to feel positive about that. Remind them about things they used to do that they can go back to do if it's permitted by the school. Prepare them for the transition back to school by getting into a routine again, going to bed early, getting up a little early, transitioning gradually back to school. Your child is resilient, as one of my colleagues said. So just be there for them and make sure that you get the care that you need as well.
Are you seeing the resources
Resources.
there?
These are some
Okay.
resources. These are some resources that I've made available to you. These are some great articles. Are you and your kids struggling to cope with COVID-19? How to start a conversation with your kids. Uh, age appropriate conversations from children to teenagers and young adults. And then books, pens, and masks. It's back to school time. These are some great articles. I've also shared some information about DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. This is a way in which you can begin to regulate your emotions by looking at the facts and helping the facts to help you deal with your emotions, understanding your emotions, controlling your behavior through your thinking skills. Dr. Adler mentioned about executive thinking. These are ways in which you can begin to regulate your emotions. So there is hope, as one of my panelists said, and reach out to us. There are a lot of people here to help you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Burton. And that was wonderful. A lot of great information shared, and I really like the point of really honing in on what you, your child, or any family member, or even yourself, are thinking about, because what you think about then certainly leads to a behavior and the action. So, what you do, what you think about, is really the key to everything that you do. So if we change our thinking, we certainly can change our behavior. And that's what we want to do during this pandemic. So thank you so very much for sharing that particular bit of advice, in addition to all of the wonderful resources that you've honed in on. So thank you to you. And I also want to say thank you to all of our panelists who really did an excellent job. We saw a lot of common themes in terms of strategies that can be implemented, certainly to improve social and emotional health, not only for students, but certainly for parents, especially related to the school environment and the home environment, and certainly applicable to all of our uh, participants that are on the call here today in some way, form, or fashion. So thank you again for that. We also have some marvelous other resources here, Westchester County government. And we're going to again send you out this send this PowerPoint to you, so you'll have reference to it. That's one. We can move right along to the second page of resources. And we're going to ask any questions in the chat box. Appears as though we also had a couple of other resources which are not going to be shared at this point in time. So that said, we will now move right into questions. If you have any questions, please place them in the chat box. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask the very first question. We have about another 10 to 12 minutes to focus on your questions, which are so very important. And Dr. Burton, I'm going to come back to you. And I'd like to ask you, because many of us know that, many of us that are parents, or certainly know of others, that are torn between, shall I have my child attend school in person, or shall I have them do the at-home schooling? And so how should parents making process and then feel good about themselves in the end? So from their own personal, social, and emotional standpoint, how do parents make this difficult decision and still feel good about themselves? Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, well, like I said before, the parents are really leaders on a different scale. And what's important is for parents to collect as much information as they can from reliable sources, speak to their school districts, find out what their plans are. But ultimately, I think that this is a personal decision for every family. Every parent needs to consult with their pediatrician or family physician to weigh the risk against the benefits of their child returning in person or doing distance learning based on individual health conditions in the family and the family circumstances. We know that many families have they're different generations that live in the family. They're older adults, they're grandparents. How much exposure can they have in their home if a child is going to school every day and coming back. I mean, it's really a personal decision for every family, but checking in on your family circumstances, checking in with your physicians based on the health of the family members.
Great, excellent. Does anybody else want to chime in on that to build on that response related to that question or anything else that we've discussed? We have about another 10 minutes if in terms of the dialogue. Anybody else want to build on that?
I have some thoughts to share too.
Okay,
This decision is not
please do.
actually taken lightly by any parent, and a lot of it has to do with socioeconomic resources and the ability to be able to have somebody be home with a child, because obviously your kids just can't be not watched um, while they're doing the tele education, and so there's a lot of different um, motivators and just logistical things that go into making those decisions. And I think, just as was said before, each family is going to have to choose for themselves what's really best for them, because not everybody has the same abilities and or opportunities or finances to be able to do different types of educational learning. And with that, whatever family decides, as long as they try to keep safe and follow the protocols as much as they can, there's a lot of guilt that parents get about making these decisions. That in such a hard time, we have to acknowledge that it's not easy to do these things, and to give ourselves a certain amount of grace in that. Knowing that even if we make a decision and our kid has a rough time or whatever, that we had made that decision with good intentions, and and just monitoring and trying to be there as present as we can for our children through whatever we end up choosing, I think is important.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. That's very important. Great add-on. Anybody else want to jump in on that at all? And if not, let's see if we have any questions here in the chat box. I know certainly our presenters have been very thorough here this evening. And seeing none, I would, at this point in time, want to again say thank you to all of you out there in WebEx land. Certain you must have found their presentations very enlightening or certainly thought-provoking, because this is a very challenging time for all of us. But I do believe, and as was noted, that we are resilient. Our children are resilient, and we as families and as a community, certainly throughout the county, can be resilient. We here in Westchester County have a number of resources, many of which were shared during this presentation, and we've got some excellent professionals as well that are doing this work, whom you've heard from here this evening. So I would encourage you all to use each other as resources in the various different environments, because a lot of this information overlaps, and as we said, certainly can be used in a number of different environments. So that said, I certainly want to say thank you. It's been my pleasure serving as your moderator. Again, want to say thank you to our presenters and thank you to the audience. And I really would like to say thank you to the Westchester County Youth Bureau staff and Dr. Damia Harris Madden, who do a wonderful job offering these webinars and certainly so much more. So with that said, under time, nothing like ending a little bit early. That's always a good thing. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Damia Harris Madden, who will close us out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I hope you don't mind that my beautiful cat is behind me. I guess she wanted to also learn how to improve her social, emotional, and psychological health. So, certainly with a 4-year-old and 6-year-old chasing her around all day. But I'd like to just again say thank you so much to the generosity of every presenter. We know that you all are increasingly busy, particularly now when the data suggests that the numbers are increasing in terms of those seeking professional help. and assistance. I do know firsthand that our young people, our parents, and our providers really do need opportunities to listen, learn, strategies to cope in this very difficult terrain. I do apologize on behalf of our county executive again. I'm so thrilled that he at least was able to listen in a little bit, as well as the deputy county executive. And as it was pointed out earlier, this is a unique and unprecedented time. And when it would normally be challenging for many young people and parents, it is now overbearing. I mean, we are just inundated and deluged with emotions at this time, given the COVID-19 epidemic and pandemic and the social unrest. But I think one of the things that can be tied back, especially for our providers that are on the line, because we really focus more on the parents and the youth, and we believe that these strategies will help our youth service providers in their work. But really looking at how organizations and systems within the community can have a shared and collective sort of response so that our young people are successful. And, I don't know if it was said earlier, but it was certainly what I was thinking, especially as I was listening to Dr. Burton, is this concept of being holistic in our approach, involving our community, holding space with our family members, having family meetings. Maybe this is something that is not a norm in many households, but perhaps can be, because our young people deserve it. They deserve the space to be able to voice how they're feeling. They can't help but overhear the news while we're watching, right? And they can't help but hear the conversations that we're having in our households about our health, and knowing friends and family members who are coping with loss. So again, as we prepare for school and the reentry really into the community, Westchester, we've been very fortunate that our numbers were driven down. But what we know is after the holidays, it's likely the numbers are going to start to creep back up. And as our young people enter those school buildings and enter into, our after school programs, we want them to be feeling secure, feeling safe, and having opportunities to really discuss how they're feeling. And if they're anxious, we need providers to understand that this child is not someone that necessarily needs a diagnosis, but instead needs a, caring adult by their side to listen to some of their fears and validate their feelings, which was said earlier. So again, I want to thank everyone who participated. The medical experts have been stellar, and this is our third series on COVID-19. I am so grateful and thankful for the organizations that have joined us today. And more is to come, because we don't know when COVID is going to end. So for those who are unable to ask questions or are going to view this on Facebook Live, please drop us a line. And, we are always open to ideas for the next series. And so with that, I bid you good night. And again, thank you to the incredible staff of the Westchester County Youth Bureau, Susan Weissman, Kate Huberta Sugg, and Mary Kate Caballero, who have been behind the scenes helping with the technology. And thank you again, Cheryl, for availing yourself to this really important mission to educate our young people, families, and providers.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.